to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, April 9th, 2015. Sure, happy it's Thursday. Sure, happy it's Thursday. Sure, happy it's Thursday. We've got lots of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. Don is in our control room today, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, obviously, big news today, in fact, Fox News is talking about it right now here, is the government of Iran, and this is not the first time they've said this. They said a final nuclear deal, this summer is contingent on the lifting of sanctions when the deal is signed. And given how the United States reneged on their easing of sanctions in the preliminary P5+1 deal, this is a very reasonable thing for Iran to do. And it is, of course, being spun by the corporate media as, how dare Iran make that demand of us? Iran should just do everything we want them to do, and then when we decide we're happy, we'll ease the sanctions. And remember, only a couple of days ago, it came out that Netanyahu was basically admitting he's not worried about an attack by Iran. His goal is to cripple Iran economically and remove them as an economic rival in the region. It's all about the money. And so we already have the U.S. Congress is talking about adding new sanctions to this, and I think it's perfectly reasonable for Iran to make this demand, but it's now being treated as a deal killer. Now, we're seeing another story over here in Council for the National Interest where Israel is pushing Congress to pass a bill to hamper the Iran deal. And Israel's agenda appears to be that they're going to push for a bill through the U.S. Congress stipulating that the deal with Iran is an international treaty requiring Senate ratification, which will not be forthcoming, and not an agreement. Now, I'm hoping every single American is watching this Congress, which is supposed to represent the American people in the operation of the federal government, but which has allowed this nation to rot during their devotion to a foreign power and is openly violating the Logan Act as they carry out Israel's command to undermine the office of the presidency. And I hope you all remember this sordid spectacle next year during the elections. Now, here's why this is an absolute nonsense approach to the situation. The P5+1 agreement, the deal, originates in the United Nations. The United States Congress has no jurisdiction there. They have no authority to go in and tell the United Nations, this is not a deal, this is a treaty. It's not up to them. And they're going to pass this bill in grandstand, and they're going to use it to put pressure on Obama to simply back off the deal with Iran and go ahead and start the war that everybody seems to want. Now, Senator Tom Cotton is out there on the forefront of the war hawks, and he's out there demanding President Obama act to protect the United States of America. And oddly enough, I concur with Senator Cotton. The president should protect the United States of America by arresting all of Israel's subversives in our government and toss them in prison for being in violation of the Logan Act. Because this is really getting out of control here. Over in the European Union, they have reinstated sanctions on an Iranian bank and 32 shipping companies. Now, the EU passed these sanctions, then they were struck down by the European Central Court, whereupon they've reimposed the sanctions under a different legal justification in order to start that whole court process all over again. They're trying to break this deal. They want a war with Iran as long as your kids are going to fight and die in it. All righty, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
The sanctions are, yeah, hello?
Yeah, you're on the air.
Yeah, Iran doesn't, who cares about the sanctions when you got BRICS, Eurasian Economic Union, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, Silk Road coming up? you know, who needs the sanctions? I mean, weren't the Iranians selling Russia oil, and then Russia was selling it, mixing it with their oil and selling it to, like, Europe?
Yeah, there have been a couple of efforts to try and circumvent the sanctions, because the sanctions, as all these sanctions seem to do, are causing more harm over in the West than they are for Iran itself.
Because, I mean, besides the shipping, I mean, Iran can go the road route, you know, if railroad gets built and circumvent that's what the Silk Road is, you know, for Asia and you know, and
yeah, they're setting up their own lines of communication, their own supply lines, parallel financial systems. The world is clearly moving away from a world that is centered on the U.S. dollar and the Federal Reserve and SWIFT system and lines of communication under the control of the U.S. empire, and that's exactly what's going on.
I know Iran doesn't have really refinery capability, right? So, I mean, that's hence maybe that's Russia is putting nuclear facilities, like, you know, with the reactors, obviously. So,
well, no, it's a little more complex than that. Iran does not have a lot of refineries, but they're willing to sell their crude oil. The reason they want to go to nuclear power is they would rather sell their oil than burn it up themselves, because they understand the oil underneath their territory is finite, and if they have nuclear power, they can sell all that much more oil, and eventually when the oil starts to run out, they'll still have a power infrastructure.
Yeah, because the whole thing is, I mean, the sanctions, I mean, what do we make to sell Iran? Or you know, what does the UK make to sell Iran? Nothing. You know, they go to China.
Yeah, that's been a big problem. Here in the United States, we've allowed our manufacturing to decline, both in volume and quality, and nobody wants our agricultural produce, and the State Department is running into serious roadblocks trying to enforce acceptance of GMO onto other countries through the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Partnership. Now, they did succeed in arm-twisting Kiev into allowing Monsanto into Ukraine, by making that acceptance a condition for some of these IMF bailouts. But more and more countries are saying, well, we're not going to go to the IMF any longer because the U.S. uses it as a tool of foreign policy, and we're setting up our own banking systems. I mean, this war for the dollarification of the world and the petrodollar, it's already failed. It cannot possibly reach its objective.
Well, the Iranian bartering system, that's kind of what helped Russia create the alternative system, right?
Yeah, because it got to a point of financial and global abuse where all of the other countries were saying, yeah, it's worth it to us to spend the money now to set up these parallel systems and parallel banks and just not have to deal with all this nonsense coming from Wall Street and the Federal Reserve and the IMF any longer. Yeah, because, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, the longer, it don't matter. I mean, Iran can just hold out till all these systems are up and running, and obviously, you know, the sanctions aren't going to mean spit. That's exactly right. The sanctions have not achieved their objective. And again, we know from Netanyahu's comment the other day, the real goal of all this wagging of Iran at us is not a concern that Iran is going to attack anybody, because they haven't done it in 200 years. It's about crippling a regional rival so that little Israel can continue to dominate the region economically, politically, and militarily. That's what it's all about. It's empire building. And Saudi Arabia, too. It's hegemony. Yes, it absolutely is. And the world is getting sick and tired of that because it's never been a beneficial system for these conquered provinces. The American empire is crumbling the way the Roman Empire did. Well, yeah, if you look, though, I mean, India and China and Russia, I mean, you know, like, that's almost half the, I mean, look at what the Brit, I mean, it's half the world. So I don't know why, you know, they would really care about the sanctions at this point, because it's been this long. Considering, you know, I mean, what's the U.S. make that the people want to buy, you know, now? Well, you know, that's it. And it's basically all of these countries on the other side are uniting together to form economic unions. And they can tell the U.S. to take their dollar and stick it where the sun don't shine. Dustin, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Iran and just how desperate the war hawks are to derail any kind of a deal and open the door for the invasion and conquest of Iran, as long as it's your kids out there catching the bullets here. Tom Cotton, who's out there trying to goad the president into just launching a war right here, is out there saying, bombing Iran's nuclear facilities, it's only going to take a few days. It's not going to bog down like Iraq. We just go in and bomb the nuclear facilities, and that'll be the end of it, and we can move on to more important things here. Well, Senator Cotton, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, watch your head climbing into the transport, and have fun. We'll call and tell them you are on your way to destroy their power station all by yourself. Cotton is also out there saying, hey, threatening a bombing raid on Iran is always going to improve diplomacy. Remember when Kennedy used to talk about the Pax Americana, a global peace not enforced by weapons of war, but brought about by agreement? Senator Cotton seems to have not really been paying much attention to that. Meanwhile, Russia is warning about the U.S. and NATO military instructors in Ukraine. We're sending in the advisors, which is how we got stuck in Vietnam. And Russia is calling it a dangerous process. And they should know, because we have gotten into all of these messes. The United States government, rather, has gotten into all these messes by saying, well, we're just sending in trainers and advisors, and they won't actually be in combat. And then all of a sudden they're in combat. Oh, they're shooting at us. We have to send in more troops, and so forth. Russia is also pointing out, this is from Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, that Kiev keeps on violating the Minsk agreements. Same situation we have with Iran. The eastern Ukrainian republics are trying to play by the rules, just like Iran is playing by the rules, and the U.S. government and its puppets. Rules, schmools, we don't need to worry about that. Just keep on pounding until we get what we want. Meanwhile, more accusations that Ukraine is disappearing opponents of Poroshenko's junta, along with more and more arrests and disappearances of independent journalists. Now, in the city of Odessa, which is where this whole civil war started, on May 2nd of last year, when all these people were burned up in this building, there was a website, The Voice of Odessa. And now it has been officially taken down because it's refusing to parrot the official line, and you will believe as we tell you to believe. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a quick little phone call here. John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Yeah, I'm having a good day today. How are you?
I'm so glad to hear that.
Right. Charlemagne hedge fund have decided to invest £2 billion in Iran starting now.
Yes.
That's about $3 billion. So the investment in Iran has already started, and it'll turn Iran into an economic powerhouse. All the amount of money that the West is literally champing at the bit to pour in there.
Well, now, how they were able to get around the sanctions is they literally formed a partnership with a company that's already inside Iran. So they're not trading across the border. And apparently within the actual sanctions, the idea of a joint venture with somebody inside Iran and somebody outside was not covered. I'm sure they'll correct that loophole as quickly as they can. But it does indicate, everybody understands that the sanctions are harming the West, they're harming Europe, they're harming Britain, they're harming Canada, they're harming the United States of America. Investment in those countries is a high-risk venture right now with little expectation of return. So obviously they're going to take their money to the countries that are booming up, that have growing economies despite the sanctions, where if you put in your money, it's going to be reasonably safe, and you're going to get a reasonable rate of return. And that's why all these big investment funds, they're starting to find ways to invest in China, Iran, Russia, all of those other countries, because they're pulling together into this giant economic union that really is going to rival both the Eurozone and the fledgling, not quite out of the eggshell North American Union.
Yeah, I mean, that's a significant amount of investment, and if others pile in, the amount of investment in Iran will dwarf the investment in Israel, which just doesn't have the population give a decent return on such investment.
Yeah, and of course the boycott divestment movement is having its effect, and people are understanding investing in Israeli businesses that are on the stolen Palestinian land. That's a high-risk venture. In fact, a listener sent me photos he took at his local Kmart where all the SodaStream products are like on clearance sale prices. They're just getting them off the racks. They're marked way down. Just get them out of here.
Yeah, now we're getting it back into the UK. The Malvinas, they found all this oil, and of course there's this contretemps between Britain and Argentina. But in recent days, they've found another massive oil field in southern England, which sort of, the carbon Nazis are going to go crazy about it.
Well, the carbon Nazis, if you've ever really noticed, Al Gore and his ilk, they're bashing on coal, but they don't really talk that much about oil. They want to tax carbon emissions, but they don't talk about the oil companies, and they don't talk about fracking pollution or any of that stuff. They're there to attack the coal industry. And I think a big part of the funding for Al Gore's human-caused global warming hoax did come from the oil companies to shut down the coal competitors, because that's the net result of what they're doing.
And moving on, Michael, to Greece and its recent payment of that hefty bill to the IMF. According to several sources, Russia did actually assist them with that finance.
Okay.
So maybe Russia are keeping Greece going until it's their turn to say, right, stop it, crash it now. Maybe Mr. Putin is pulling another checkmate on the IMF. We don't know, but it looks like Russia did assist them. They didn't quite have enough cash to get that payment made within Greece, so it looks like Russia assisted them. And the quotation you were looking for was, I think it was Mr. Clinton who said, we want to, show the world the power of our example, not the example of our power.
Okay, well, the quote that I had about the Pax Americana, that was definitely John F. Kennedy.
Oh, right.
Okay?
I think Mr. Clinton. Yeah.
All right, well, listen, we're coming up on a commercial break. I got more callers waiting on the line. So, John, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Take another break for commercials. We'll be back with more phone calls in a minute. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over in Iran, their supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is accusing Saudi Arabia of genocide over the airstrikes into Yemen, which continue to target civilians and civilian assets. And Iran is saying that Saudi Arabia should be taken to the International Criminal Court for these very obvious war crimes that are going on. All right, boy, the phone lines are really loading up here, so we're going to start with Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. This is from the biting off more than you can chew department. Iraq is roughly the size of California. Iran is roughly the size of Alaska, or 2.5 times the size of Texas. And so you have this, this Shiite, it's a center point of Shiite power. Syria is the other center point right now. Everybody's so anxious to attack Iran that the Sunni Shiite tension is somewhat held, in balance because of the existence of Iran and Syria. I wonder if Israel and the United States understand that if they upset the apple cart and throw things in favor of the Sunnis by overthrowing Iran and or Syria, Israel could end up with a whole boatload of Sunni nations arrayed against them, without any divide and conquer Hegelian dialectic between the Shias and the Sunnis to keep them busy with each other rather than Israel.
That's a very real problem, and it has little to do with Sunni and Shiite, because, as you know, Saudi Arabia is claiming to have basically put together a military coalition among 22 of the nations in the region. It's a unified force, and now al-Sisi over in Egypt is saying exactly the same thing. We need a united Arab force from all nations, a single military power representing us all, with which to go and deal with all these acts of terror. And, of course, it's a little awkward for al-Sisi because it means that he's going to have to start being buddy-buddy with the very groups that he has been opposing all this time. But what seems to be forming, and this has got to be Israel's worst nightmare, an Arab Middle East all uniting together all of a sudden under a political coalition with a single unified military force. Israel would have no choice but to use nuclear weapons to try and stop them if they decide that they're a little fed up with Israel's behavior, which I think pretty much everybody is.
Well, Mike, right on that very point. Now, I know you're not religious, but a lot of Jews and a lot of Christians are looking for a literal fulfillment of Ezekiel 38 and 39, in which what is called the Magog battle is described, listing Persia, which is modern Iran, Ethiopia, Libya, Turkey, and all these nations coming together against Israel. So I know you're not religious, but I'm just saying there are hundreds of millions of people of religious faith, Jews and Christians, who are looking to the don't want it, but believe that there will occur that very type of battle against Israel prophesied by Ezekiel. Just want to point that out.
Well, no, I understand that, and Israel has over the years successfully exploited all of this end times myth to build its support among the Christians in the United States of America. And that support is beginning to erode, thankfully. But we were at a point right now where a significant number of people walking around the United States of America are actually, again, eager to see the Armageddon and the final battle because they're absolutely convinced that when it's all over, Jesus is going to come down and invite them up to the big house. And they don't care what happens to anybody else as long as they get their ticket up to the pearly gates.
Well, that's not just for the record. That's not part and parcel of the official doctrine or approach to that sort of thing.
Well, that depends on whose Bible you're using.
No, I had called about this the other day. The vast majority of Christians are actually sort of avoiding those who believe they'll be raptured out, or sort of escapist. But there's really no incentive to create havoc and say, there's no. There aren't Christians walking around saying we want to bring this about.
No, that's not true. As I pointed out the other day, there are entire churches who see it as their mission to bring about those final days. I think Sarah Palin's church up in Alaska was one of these groups. And they may be considered fringe and they may be considered unofficial, but these are people who have met together. They're in a building. They've organized a religious community that actively seeks to somehow accelerate the end times because they're tired of living sin-free lives and they want it all to be over and get their ticket to heaven. Okay?
It would be an exceedingly small fringe.
We don't know.
The dispensationalists in general, though, the dispensationalists, like the Assemblies of God, the Southern Baptists, do not ascribe to that.
Glenn, I don't want to get into a discussion of what this or that or the other group of Christians believe because it's all over the map here. I mean, Christianity is hardly a unified view of the world. So thank you very much for the phone call. I got to let you go because I got phone calls piling up. We're going to go to Nick in Ohio. Aloha, Nick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks for taking my call, Michael. I'd like to disagree with you slightly on the agreement with Iran. I think it is a treaty, and it does require Senate approval.
Well, again, this deal originated in the United Nations, okay? And they're calling it a deal. Iran is calling it a deal. And the United States Congress has no jurisdiction over the United Nations. The only thing they can do, and they have threatened to do, is to vote to stop making their payments to the UN.
Right. My position is that you can't void the Constitution simply by renaming things. And I had a great deal of trouble when during the Bush years they said, this is not cruel and unusual punishment. This is enhanced interrogation. So I really do object when people try to do an end run around the Constitution.
No, this is not an end run. I mean, not all international business requires a treaty. Their agreements between governments happen all the time that are just worked out diplomatically, and there'll be a deal, and it doesn't raise to the level of a treaty. And this has not been declared to be a treaty to begin with. Congress wants to define it as such, but the definition of this agreement, what it actually is under the control of the United Nations.
Well, will it bind the United States to some obligation or action?
Yes, if the United States agrees to it, but again, because this is foreign policy, that is the jurisdiction of the White House and the U.S. State Department. And every member of Congress who's out there directly, they're going to Israel, they're trying to find some way to derail this, they're intruding into an area in which, under the Constitution, they have no jurisdiction. They're in violation of the Logan Act. They can go to jail for 3 years for conducting foreign policy on their own outside the authority of the White House and the State Department.
Doesn't the Logan Act make references to branches of government, which would include the Congress?
It makes references to branches of government that are authorized to negotiate on behalf of the United States by the executive branch and the State Department.
Okay, so then the approval then would not, once again, defining things out of existence, you say, if I get to approve it, that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily interfering with your negotiation.
If you derail the approval by saying we have a right to ratify, and then you obviously Senate's not going to ratify it or they wouldn't be kicking up this fuss, that's an intrusion into foreign policy. And again, Congress has no authority over the United Nations, and they're the ones that set this up. They're the ones who are running it. Congress has got nothing to say about it. The relationship between the United States of America and the United Nations is technically foreign policy. That's the executive branch and the State Department. And Congress is trying to derail it to serve their masters in Israel, and I hope every single American voter is watching this sordid spectacle and keeps it in mind next year when the primary seasons crank up. Got to take a break for commercials here. Nick, thank you very much. We're going to be back after 4 minutes. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over in Egypt's North Sinai, there's been another outbreak of violence. 11 civilians and 2 soldiers killed. Apparently, some of the civilians were killed as a missile hit a house in a village in the North Sinai. The whole world is just getting wacko. Everybody's all too eager to just push the trigger. Over in Kuwait, they have brought back compulsory military service for all citizens, starting at the age of 18, and remain available in reserve forces till the age of 45. So everybody's gearing up. They all know what's coming. It's going to be a new world war, and the money junkies are saying, yee-haw, this is how we make the big bucks. All right, we're going to grab ourselves into the phone call here. Seth in Oklahoma. Aloha, Seth. Welcome to the show. You might want to turn your speaker down here. What's on your mind?
Thank you. Thanks for taking my phone call. I was just wondering about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Could they be prosecuted in any way? Or Monsanto's?
You know, I have to be very honest. I know the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are into some very questionable activities. But there's a lot of cutouts. I know that they were funding this typhus vaccination program in Kenya that was exposed as covertly sterilizing women, but you'd have to be able to prove that Bill and Melinda Gates actually knew that was happening rather than they were simply donating money to what they thought was a charitable beneficial operation. So in theory, yes. In practice, very difficult.
And the chemtrails, since there's really no global warming, why are they still spraying the skies with?
Oh, come on. You know, this whole chemtrail nonsense is one of the many hoaxes the government likes to plant on the Internet and the independent media to make us look foolish, along with claims that the Apollo didn't go to the moon, there was no plane at the Pentagon, and all the rest of that other nonsense. And so thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go on that one. Now, over in Pakistan, a moment of sanity shining forth amid the gloom. Their parliament has voted opposition to getting involved in the Yemen war. Apparently, Saudi Arabia called them up and said, "Hi, Pakistan, we need some help. We're all going to gang up and whoop on Yemen for daring to kick out their U.S. puppet ruler." And Pakistan parliament said, "I think we're going to sit this one out, if you don't mind." Meanwhile, Canadian warplanes have joined in their first operation inside Syria. 2 Canadian CF-18 Hornet fighters with precision-guided munitions, and they bombed a Syrian military installation near Raqqa, which, in theory, was under the control of ISIS at the time. But it almost feels like Stephen Harper wants to play with the big boys. Come on, can I join the Syrian campaign? I'll send 2 of my jets. There were a total of 10 jets in this attack here. And it's like Stephen doesn't want to be left behind. I want to get involved. It's going to be great. This will be in the history books. Now, down in Venezuela, following the U.S. declaration by Obama that Venezuela somehow represented a threat to our national security, Venezuela has started drafting citizen soldiers to be prepared to fight a potential U.S. invasion, which we know the U.S. has been trying to overthrow or invade Venezuela going all the way back to Hugo Chavez because, gosh darn it, he was running his country for the benefit of the Venezuelan people, and he was daring to sell Venezuela's oil for currencies other than the U.S. dollar, and they tried to overthrow him, actually got him out of office for 2 weeks, got back in with a counter coup, been trying to go after Venezuela's current leadership. And apparently this has become so embarrassing to the United States because we all know that's what they're doing. They're starting to backtrack. And just days before this Summit of the Americas, a White House official has said, well, actually, no, Venezuela does not pose a threat to U.S. national security, wanting to ease the tensions before they have all these meetings about what's going on down there. And so it's like they're flipping back and forth. There's no thread of continuity right now going on with our government. It's just saying whatever they think is going to get what they want from whoever they want to get it from. Now, as you heard earlier, there's a big stink going on about this group called Al-Shabaab, who was involved in this attack at a university where all the non-Muslims were killed. And the media has been fanning it up saying, see, the Muslims hate the Christians and so forth and so on. But it's rather revealing because in the article that I read about this, they also mentioned that Al-Shabaab was behind the attack at the Nairobi shopping mall. Okay? Now, we already know that mall attack was another false flag. And if Al-Shabaab was the group that was supposedly doing it, then they are as phony as Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They're a manufactured front group to cause trouble, justifying military intervention into yet another nation we have no business being in. And on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com, I reposted an image from that Nairobi mall attack, which underscores it was just a hoax, another hoax. And the picture is a guy in a white nylon jacket being escorted away from the scene by a police officer. And there's a blood stain and bullet holes on the back of the jacket. Now, if you look at that stain, you can see that as it wicks through the fabric, it's separating into a clear liquid and leaving the red pigment behind. Real blood doesn't do that. Fake movie blood does. I've seen enough of it in my career. But more importantly, if that walking man had really been shot where those bullet holes indicate on the jacket, he would probably be dead from spinal damage and fragments of the scapula driven into his lungs. He certainly would not be able to walk. So that whole thing was another fake, and that means Al-Shabaab is another fake. To get you all hot and bothered to invade whatever country it is we're supposed to invade this week. Now, as John in Barbados pointed out, Greece succeeded in making the payment due today to the IMF of 450 million euros. And according to John in Barbados, apparently Russia stepped in to help just a little tiny bit, because I don't think Russia wants to see a cascade of defaults all across the world, both for their own economic entanglements with other countries, and second, because if there's an economic crash, Russia knows the U.S. will start the war for real, if for no other reason than to distract everybody from how badly they messed up the global economy, meaning Wall Street, the IMF, the Federal Reserve. Yes, the economy's crashing, but we're sending the missiles off to Russia today. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Now, the reality is, despite the so-called sanctions, Russia is getting stronger economically, and that means it's getting stronger politically. It is getting stronger in international stature. It is being seen as a nation that can stand up to the bullying of the United States of America. Yield on the 30-year Russian dollar bond has plunged to 3.62%. That's the lowest level since June of 2013. A lower yield on a bond means that the bond is considered a safe investment. When the bond yields are driven up very high, it means the government understands there's a risk we could collapse. And so a lower yield means more trustworthy. Now, Greece, which, if John in Barbados is correct, just got a helping hand from Russia regarding the IMF, is urging a halt to all these Western sanctions against Russia. And there are legitimate reasons for this, because these sanctions are not hurting Russia's economy. They're hurting Europe. They're hurting Greece. They're hurting Canada. They're hurting the United States of America. They're hurting Venezuela. They're not accomplishing what we were told they were supposed to accomplish. But again, we are unfortunately cursed with a central government that is institutionally incapable of ever admitting error, misjudgment, bad planning, mistake, and changing course to adapt to a changing situation. So it hasn't worked so far. We'll just do more of it, which also includes Iran, apparently. Now, the Russian Prime Minister has offered Thailand a free trade zone with this new Eurasian Economic Union. They're out there making deals. The U.S. is trying to make war. Who do you think history will judge most kindly? All righty. And as John in Barbados mentioned, London-based Charlemagne Capital has teamed up with financial services group Turquoise Partners in Tehran to invest in the Iranian stock market. By being a partnership or a team, they're able to get around the sanctions. And Iran is a happening place, and the investment money is going to go there. If this Charlemagne group shows a profit, others will follow. Sanctions be gosh darned. We'll be right back after the news. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Don is still in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. We're still talking about the economy. Now, as you're probably aware, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank has now closed its initial founding enrollment. The U.S. is not part of it. Iran is. And China has accepted their application for membership, and so now Iran is part of this Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The world is turning away from the U.S.-centric global economy. Apparently, Russia is going to fund $100 billion worth of a reserve currency pool for BRICS to allow it to ride out global economic shocks. Gee, I wonder what they think might be happening. Now, over in Saudi Arabia, which was the primary instrument used by the U.S. to try and crash oil prices to try and harm Russia's economy, obviously that failed. But the net result is that for the first time in 15 years, Saudi Arabia is having to borrow money to run their nation. They're running at a deficit. And I realize here in the United States of America, deficits are just a fact of life. We've been running deficits every year since Andrew Jackson was in office. But for the Saudis, that's a rarity. People are very upset over there because they don't want to become a debt slave nation. China has agreed to build a $2 billion Iran-Pakistan pipeline. The project had been temporarily on hold because of U.S. opposition, and apparently Pakistan and China just decided that they really weren't going to pay attention to what the U.S. wants anymore. Now, the Swiss government has just issued a 10-year debt at a negative yield. Now, yes, a low yield on a bond means it's trusted, but to go negative on it, there's something very, very weird about that. It doesn't matter how safe a bond may be seen. If you're not going to make money on it, what's the point? Meanwhile, over in France, there is a nationwide strike against austerity, and it's hit the entire nation. The Eiffel Tower is closed, schools are closed, airports are shut down, air traffic control, radio broadcasts. And the strike happened today after President Hollande's government said it expected 1% economic growth this year and lowered its forecast for 2016 and 2017. So the French people are very unhappy. Time to get those guillotines out of dry storage. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. The West is in a deflationary mode as taxes keep rising, suffocating economic expansions. Now, government always loves to raise taxes. But past a certain point, it becomes counterproductive because taxes can become so oppressive and there's so little coming back from the government for that tax money that it will drive businesses to other shores. Walgreens is going to close 200 stores because of a drop in business, and Walgreens is now moving their corporate headquarters to Switzerland. They're literally renouncing their U.S. citizenship. They're merging with Alliance Boots, which is a European drugstore chain, and they're moving to Switzerland because the tax incentives are much better there. They're going to pay less in taxes and get more back for it. And we're going to see this accelerate. The more government raises taxes, the more corporations who should be paying those taxes are going to go someplace else. And we'll be left a nation with no jobs, no businesses, no way to pay off this horrendous debt run up by this central government. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Stephen in Little Rock. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, you just said something about Iran being one of the members of the new Alliance Bank.
Yes.
Does that mean that if they put in more sanctions, they would sanction maybe that bank?
I think the repercussion is that the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is not going to be going along with U.S. sanctions against Iran because they're not in the U.S. U.S. sanctions only affect U.S. companies. EU sanctions only affect EU member states and companies. And what we're seeing is the emergence of a world that is simply not interested in all of this sanctioning activity by Europe or the United States. And they're just going to go on about their business. And the net result will be exactly the same thing we have seen with the Russian sanctions. The sanctioned countries will go on doing business with everybody else in the world, and U.S. and European businesses are cut off from their business. There were 6,000 companies in Germany alone doing business with the Russian republics, and they have just been hammered by the sanctions, and they're in serious trouble.
Okay, it was just a thought. Thanks. Keep up the good work, Mark.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Yeah, the whole point of this thing about sanctions, the U.S. is acting like if the U.S. says we're going to sanction Russia and Iran, that the rest of the world will say, oh yes, oh mighty master in North America. We will go along. And the rest of the world is saying, no. You want to cut yourselves off economically from Russia and Iran? Go ahead and do it. And they're going to rush in to fill that void. And that's exactly what has happened. That's why Russia's economy is doing well despite the sanctions. Russia just turned away from Europe and the United States and said, let's do business with all these other countries. Peace through commerce. Now, J.P. Morgan has issued a warning to their own shareholders, saying there is a new financial crisis on the horizon. And get ready for it. So everybody knows this. We're in this bizarre little race to see what happens first. Massive crash of the U.S. economy, European economy, all these private central banks, or really seeing World War III start for real. And the tragedy here is that all of these countries that are hideously, hopelessly in debt to the private central banks, they want to get the war going first because then they've got something to blame the poverty on and duck responsibility for all these brain-dead choices they've made in the past, like selling us into the slavery of the private central banks. Remember, people in politics, as a class, are not the sort of ethical, honorable human beings who would stand up and say, I made a mistake and I accept the responsibility for it. They never do that. Politicians will always take credit for everything good that happens, even if they had nothing to do with it, and they'll always find somebody to blame for everything bad that happens. That's what makes them politicians. And right now, people in the United States are looking back at the linkage between getting into a hopeless financial mess and getting into a world war to get out of it. Crash of 1907, distract everybody, get out of it with World War I. Crash of 1929, Great Depression, distract everybody from it, get out of it with World War II. Crash of 2008, and look how many nations the United States has invaded, or drone struck, or tried to overthrow from within. World War III is here. We're already in it. Future history books are going to say World War III was underway at the start of 2015. And I am very concerned that 50 years from now, the world will look on the Stars and Stripes with the same disgust and revulsion that our generation looked on the swastika, and for many of the exact same reasons. Another story from Investment Watch blog, bank bail-ins are coming to the U.S. and Europe, and war is being pushed in the Middle East by the U.S. government and the central bankers. Remember, those central bankers, they love war. War is the bankers' richest harvest, and they don't care which side wins or loses because they make money off of both sides. They loan both sides money to fight the war. When it's all over, they loan both sides more money to rebuild from the war. And when it's all over, this dirty little trick the central banks like to play. Ordinary people have what they had before, more or less. The graveyards are a lot bigger, and we're all back in debt to the private central bankers for another 100 years. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show. We're still talking about the economy. Right now here in the United States of America, the student loan debt has hit $1.2 trillion with a T dollars. Now, when I was a young person, back in the days of steam-powered typewriters and kerosene terminals, education was about getting an education to get a high-paying job. But like so many other aspects of our society, higher education has been transformed into another money-making deal for the bankers. Lure these kids into college by promising them all kinds of glorious results from having a college degree in subjects like Sanskrit. There's no financial support anymore, very few scholarships out there, unless you're specific targeted ethnic groups. So you loan them the money for their college education. Get them on the debt hook. Plunge them down hard so they can't shake that barb. And they come out of college, the jobs that were promised to them simply are not there, and they're stuck, and they're trapped. And there is a student loan bubble of stupendous proportions. And they were bundling the student loans, too, as investment vehicles, just like they did the mortgages back in 2008. Why shouldn't they? When it all implodes, they'll just dump the losses on you, the American people, they think. The flaw in their plan is, we, the American people, we're out of money. We're out. We don't have any more to give. With companies like Walmart shutting hundreds of stores and leaving the country completely, where are going to be the jobs that would allow ordinary people to pump new wealth into the bottom of the pyramid to keep it up? And the answer is, they're not there. Now, last year on November 16th, there was a change to banking rules passed by the Congress. It was little noticed and unremarked by the corporate media. But basically, they reorganized who gets what in the event of some kind of a crash. Remember, one of the things they did was they redefined a savings account holder from being a savings account holder to being an unsecured creditor of the bank. Meaning if the bank loses money, your savings account is your investment. And if the bank loses money, you should lose money as well. That certainly is not the model of a savings account that I grew up with. And worse, your bank accounts are now considered collateral against the bank's derivatives debt. If the banks are collapsed by derivatives, your bank accounts will be looted first to pay down the derivatives debt. Another reason why you should not have any more money in your bank right now than you need to cover your immediate obligations. And you should have the rest under your own control. At home, under the mattress, buried in a mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation. Some of it in cash, and some of it in physical silver and gold. If you need to pay a bill, you go down to the bank with cash, you put it in, and you write the check against it. That's how you do it. Because the signs are on the wall. They're coming to loot you to save themselves. They've already done it several times. And they're very clever about hiding it. You know, TARP and bailouts and all the rest of it. But it doesn't matter what they call it or how they describe its operate. It's basically taking trillions of dollars away from the American people and giving it to the banksters so the banksters can turn around and loan it back to us at interest. which is a sweet deal for the bankers. But Americans aren't borrowing the way they used to because they don't have any confidence the economy is actually recovering. And so these bankers just took most of those bailout funds and they just wrote themselves huge bonus checks, and they're happy. System works for them. And they're trying to figure out more ways for them to be in control of your money. See, if you're one of those people who thinks that your money in the bank is still your money, you're wrong. That was changed last November. That's your investment in the bank, and if the bank gets in trouble, you can lose it legally. Now, there's an interesting story over at governmentslaves.info where the corporate media is starting to sell the idea that we really should not be using any cash in our lives. And the spin that's coming out of there is really, think of the health hazard. Because, you know, you're passing all this cash around and you don't know what germs are on there. Now, for the paper currency, most people don't know this. Part of the formula for the paper used in the Federal Reserve notes is a bacteriostatic agent to deal with that possibility. And, of course, coins are easy to wash and clean off at some point. But they're pushing this idea that cash is dirty. You shouldn't use it. Just use your little plastic card, for which the banks get a piece of the action. And, of course, the banks and the government know exactly where all your money is at any time and what you're spending it on. And we're already seeing other countries that are already imposing limits on the size of cash purchases because, really, terrorists use cash. Anyway. Now, I want to talk about Walter Scott. Everybody is still jumping on board trying to exploit this politically. Now, the officer who shot Walter Scott has been charged with murder, as well he should be. He has been fired from the police force, as well he should be. The mayor of the town is now saying all police officers are going to wear body cameras to keep an eye on what they're doing, which only works as long as the cameras are not being sabotaged. And we already know that a lot of police will find ways to rig the cameras to fail at key times, along with the dashboard cameras in their cruisers. It's a PR stunt. It's not going to significantly change how the police are treating the American people. Now, over at Ex Republic TV, they're asking a very pertinent question. With this video exposing the Walter Scott killing, why is the man who took a video of Eric Garner's murder at the hands of police still in jail? They tried to grab this guy, throw him in jail because they didn't want him talking to anybody about what he'd seen and what he'd videoed. And by the way, the officer who shot Walter Scott had a prior excessive force complaint against him. There was an investigation, and I use the term loosely, that was closed without any of the witnesses to the excessive force ever being talked to by the so-called investigators. They're just going through the motions here. And they're trying to fan up the racial aspect of this. Investigative journalist Stephen Janis discusses the shooting with civil rights attorney Dwight Pettit, who comes out and says the shooting of unarmed African Americans is not uncommon. Well, it may not be uncommon, or it may be uncommon rather, but it's a distorted picture of what's really going on. And when we come back from these commercials, I'll explain why. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Here we're talking about the Walter Scott shooting and how all sorts of people are piling on to try and politically exploit it. And a consistent theme we have been seeing, whether it's Walter Scott or Eric Garner or what happened in Ferguson or the rest of it, is this is a race problem where white cops are killing black people, you know, without good cause and trying to fan up racial discord in this country in order to make it an issue to campaign on next year. Because they don't want you thinking about the real issues that affect your life, like the economy and the wars. We'll fan up racism, we'll have gay rights, we'll have all this other stuff going on that people will argue about because we don't want them looking really close at what the government has really been up to here. So we're seeing all these attorneys out there. We're seeing protests on there about all this white-on-black violence. Now, there is no question the police are out of control in this country. You are 8 times more likely to be wrongfully murdered by a police officer than by a terrorist in this country. And even that may be understating the problem, because obviously the police like to conceal this information. And by the way, that's including all the people who died on 9/11. If you start the day after 9/11, the ratio is much, much worse. Now, it turns out, for all this talk about, bad white cops killing poor, innocent black people, and they are, but that's not the whole story. Up at the Washington State University in Spokane, they did a study of police records across the country, and what they found out was that because of this issue of racism, police officers are less likely to pull the trigger on a black suspect than on a white. They'll hesitate and say, I could get into trouble on this one. If it's a white suspect, nobody will notice. And so the actual reality is, as tragic as the killing of an unarmed black suspect is, and it is, the American police forces are 25 times more likely to shoot white people than any other race. It's open season on us pigmentally challenged people, because the police are worried about public backlash if they kill a black person. But nobody cares if a white person gets gunned down, do they? Now, here's a good story. This is over in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And the police pulled over 2 teenagers because the light bulb that was illuminating their license plate had burned out. And then they insisted they smelled marijuana, and they kicked the kids out of the car to search it. They didn't find anything. During the incident, the cops pepper sprayed the passenger, who was a minor, and said, under law, you've got to call my parents to come get me. And the cops pepper sprayed him in the eyes twice, took out their tasers, and stunned the kids. Then the police realized that the driver of the car had put his cell phone up on the dashboard and set it to record. And so the police confiscated the phone and deleted the video, threw it back on the driver's seat laughing. Well, he who laughs last laughs best, because the owner of the cell phone, the driver, found the video in the recently deleted folder on his smartphone, which also tells us the police don't know anything about how modern electronics work. And so now the video's been made public, and they're going to go after these cops with a civil lawsuit, as well they should. Because if the government will not hold the police to the letter of the law, we, the people, must. We have to stand up for our rights. The government isn't standing up for our rights on our behalf, as they like to pretend they do. Quite the contrary. They're busy knocking down the rights left and right as fast as they can. Right to privacy, right to freedom of speech, right to keep and bear arms. Right to be left alone. There's a basic human right. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Richard up in Ottawa. Aloha, thank you for waiting patiently. What's on your mind today?
Aloha, it's Richard from Ottawa. Yeah, you have a good topics there today. You were talking about Harper. There was about the Canadian government there in the United States. People are not aware too much about. There was rumors, because Canada's considered a neutral country, and for years that's how we were taught at school. And it came out in the 90s there, when Jean Chrétien was the Prime Minister of Canada. He declared that we had nuclear bombs in Quebec side. That's the the second biggest province in Canada.
Yes. And
so we have nuclear bombs too. We're not a neutral country if we have nuclear bombs, So, sad to say, like the United States, they say God bless America, the saying. But, they don't even honor God. They honor the God of war, eh? The God of war, of force, they say. So that's sad. You're just going to get, like you're talking about the Third World War, and you can see it coming, It's so clear.
It really is. And, again, Canada is not neutral. I mean, technically, even with nuclear weapons, you can be neutral by saying, we're just going to stay here, sit on our nuclear weapons, and not get involved. But as it turns out, I just was sent this story from Sputnik News, where Stephen Harper's government is giving Canadian satellite data directly to Kiev.
Yeah.
To help them wage war against the Eastern Ukrainian Republic. So Canada is not neutral. They're very much involved on this on the side of Kiev. Stephen Harper just wants to be seen as part of the big boys, and we're out there, with our satellites and our planes, and I want to play along and prove that Canada's a world power.
I can't get. Yeah, but Mike, I can't get over how they mess with Russia. Russia is a formidable, opponent. You don't mess with Russia. I mean, he's risking all the Canadian lives here, in nuclear war.
Well, I'm sure Harper is convinced that the U.S. ballistic missile defense system will protect Canada along with the United States. Unfortunately, what Stephen Harper doesn't realize is most of the United States ballistic missile defense system is junk, like this giant floating radar we have out here in Pearl Harbor. It's $10 billion, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, I know. They have their bunkers 100 feet under the earth. That's all they care. They don't care about anybody else. But you're talking about a lot about a slave, eh? Like slave, about people being slave to the government and slave to different religion, right?
Yes.
Hey, Mike?
Yes.
Yeah, but that's why there's an old saying. It says there's a free woman and a bond or slave woman. And, people that follow religion is a slave woman. I know that because they have to follow different things. But there's also the free woman. The people that think outside the box are called free. But it doesn't mean they're not, you still have a faith, Because, people don't realize, I was 14 when I started studying when I was younger. And I studied, and I know all about different religion, but I don't follow any religion, I have a faith. And it's called, you think outside the box. But you still can have a faith, it's free.
Well, I'm coming from a slightly different point of view. I think the capacity for humans to believe things without knowing for a fact that they're true is one of the major tools of enslavement of our kind. And
did you know, Mike? Even in the scripture, God says in one place in the scripture, it says in James, it says James 1:26, if any man has a religion, a true religion, God's eyes is helping the widows and the afflicted and keep unspotted from this world. It's nothing to do with what people are painting today, religion, because religion is just creating war. Like, I'm better, my religion is better than yours, and they kill each other.
Yeah, that is definitely... Well, religion is used to sell wars to people, to go and get them to fight it without asking for the very high pay that such combat really deserves to be paid. This is how they get people to go off and wage war virtually for free. Go slaughter the Saracens, you will eventually get into heaven for free. Okay, and
I want to ask you a question.
Well, unfortunately, Richard, we're coming up on a commercial break, and I'm going to have to let you go. But thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to hang up on you and take a commercial break here for about 4 minutes. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And boy, I got to tell you, when it rains, it pours. And no, we're not talking about the climate. Apparently, also in South Carolina, in Charleston, there was a police officer who got into a domestic dispute in his home. Police showed up. This officer barricaded himself in his house and then committed suicide. Now, this gets to an issue I have been wondering about for quite some time. There was a study done in Florida that showed police officers are much higher users of prescription antidepressants than the general population. It's about 1 out of every 4. For ordinary Americans, it's much higher for police officers, approaching almost half of them. And we know these medications can lead to episodes of irrational violence, which we are seeing in these videos, and suicide, which happened in this case. And what's really amazing is how hard the pharmaceutical industry is trying to not acknowledge this problem. If you go over to whatreallyhappened.com, over in the right menu bar, there's a graphic of a medical capsule, and if you click it, it'll go to a resource page about the problems with these medications. Virtually all of the mass shooters being wagged at us by the gun grabbers were either on or withdrawing from these medications. And when you're withdrawing from them is a time of maximum risk of just going postal. And I remember following Sandy Hook. There was this video that came out of the Connecticut state government where there was a group trying to use the state's equivalent of the Freedom of Information Act to find out what medications Adam Lanza was on. And there was a representative of the state government. I think, in fact, he was the lawyer for the state's medical examiner, was in the meeting. Patrick Quanashi, I think his name was. And he was out there just saying, look, the public doesn't need to know this. And he went on to say, even if in this one case the medication made Lanza do what he did, that's not something the public needs to know, or they'll stop taking their medications. Well, Patrick was wrong, because it's not just this one occurrence. If you go to the resource page I just mentioned, you will be directed eventually to a website called ssristories.com, which has hundreds and hundreds of case studies of normal, healthy people being put on these medications and then experiencing very bizarre mental episodes. One of the stories that has stuck with me all the time was this young kid diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is a made-up disease to sell pills with. And when I was a kid, before these medications existed, we had a different name for ADHD. It's called My Teacher's Boring the Crap Out of Me. And so this kid was put on the medication, and he tried to commit suicide. And they got to him in time, and when it was all over, they said, why did you try and kill yourself? And he said, I don't know. It just popped into my head, and I could not stop myself. These medications are very dangerous. And if almost half of our civilian police force are on these medications, that goes a long way to explaining this explosion of violence against the people. And by the way, one other thing to consider. Since these medications were introduced, domestic violence has increased. Because these antidepressants, they put you on a hair trigger, and I think it's a major problem. And getting on back to Patrick Quantistate, if you look at Connecticut's economy and how much of it is tied up in these giant pharmaceutical corporations, now you understand why they wanted to keep a lid on that. Because apparently in the Connecticut government and at the big pharmaceutical corporations, they're okay with people committing suicide or mass shootings. As long as they paid for their medication, all will be well. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Chris in Detroit, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael.
Hi.
I have a little bit of I need some advice from you, and I have a request for you.
Okay.
The request would be if you could add a link onto your page that regarding your resume. Because I don't think a lot of listeners know exactly how intelligent or where your past is. I mean, it's incredible.
I think it's in there somewhere. I don't know where it is offhand, but I know at one point I did put up kind of a brief little history. But you know, the story isn't me. I'm not the story. I'm sorry. I'm here to try and alert people to things they should be thinking about themselves. And I don't want to be in a position of saying you should trust what I say because I've done this and I've done that and I've done the rest of it. I'm trying to encourage people to become their own best analysts and researchers and to really think for themselves here.
You do an excellent job at it, sir, but the reason I request that is because I try to turn people on you, and a lot of times they just hear what's coming out of your mouth. And the way things are nowadays, people are just so programmed to believe what they know versus having someone from a background, have NASA doing film work, teaching. Again, don't sell yourself short. I understand what you're saying.
I'm not selling myself short here, but what you're dealing with, the mechanism you're dealing with, the idea that they don't know who I am is just an excuse. There are people in this country who want to think they're good, decent, moral human beings, then like the heroes they see in TV and films, that they would have the courage to stand up against corruption and injustice. But when you're actually confronted with that, most people, I got to do with the mortgage, I got to do with this. And so the way propaganda works to keep people imprisoned to the government's agenda is to give them enough information where they can pretend to themselves that everything is okay so that they can go on believing that they are good and decent people. Because if you know that there is corruption, assassination, torture, whatever else is going on in the government, and you decide you're not going to do anything about it, then you have to surrender that part of your self-image that says, I'm a good, decent human being who is courageous enough to take on corruption. And most people don't even want to face that choice. So all propaganda does, and this is the reason why it all breaks down so quickly when you think about it. All propaganda does is give people who don't want to think about what's going on an excuse not to think about what's going on so they can go on saying, everything is fine and I'm a decent, courageous human being. And you're dealing with people who are in denial. They don't want to see what's going on, because then they have to face that choice. Am I going to take a stand against it, or am I just going to be part of the problem and go along with it and be just as guilty of acquiescence as the good Germans were in World War II? And most people don't want to deal with that. Americans are far more tied up with their self-image than even the Germans were. And it's a very, very powerful lure. Now, the good news is that the number of people who are in that kind of denial on which such propaganda will work is a rapidly dwindling minority. And there's a bio, well, there's bios about me all over the place. Not all of them are flattering. But I'll put a little something up there. But I think anybody who's been with this radio show or the website for a while knows my general background and how I got to be where I am right now. But again, I want the focus to be on what's going on in the world, the rush to war, the corruption of Wall Street and Washington, D.C., and I don't see myself as being a personality in the media sense. In fact, I'd kind of prefer not to be very honest about this.
I think you do a great job. I just wanted to let you know that. It's an honor to talk to you.
I appreciate that. I thank you for the kind words. I mean, in hindsight, I probably should have been wearing my V for Vendetta mask all this time. It would have made my personal life a lot easier.
I need advice from you now.
Okay.
I volunteer at a food bank, have for the past 9 months, and they keep trying to convert me. And I'm not atheist. I'm not anything. I don't believe a whole lot of anything. Any good advice to keep them from bugging me about the Christianity thing?
Well, if they're bugging you about it, you're going to have to find some other venue to do your charity. Now, with the two churches that my wife and I are involved with in these food programs for the elementary school and for the hungry and homeless, they all know that I'm not a believer. They don't have a problem with that because we are coming together in that joint endeavor of trying to do something about all the suffering that's out there. And that's our focus. And what I believe or don't believe is really not an issue with these people. And that's fine, and it's perfectly comfortable. And, when they pray, I stand there respectfully. And, I'm not trying to proselytize them, and they don't try and proselytize me. They know it's a wasted effort anyway. But we just remember, our focus is on dealing with the hardship and hunger and homeless of all these people who are coming through these doors. And if the people in your church can't accept you as being part of that program, then maybe you need to find a non-religious food bank. They're out there. Trust me, there's a lot of these organizations out there that you can join. Thank you very much for the phone call, Chris. We have to let you go now and take another break for the news. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. Don is still in the control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, in the wake of the foregone conclusion of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev being found guilty, which we knew was going to happen because his so-called defense attorney, provided generously by the government, told the jury he did it. No, let's just get past all this nonsense, get to the penalty phase. And they're going to fry him. Dzhokhar's mother, of course, continues to maintain that her son is innocent. And since the jury decision was handed down, I got a lot of emails from people saying, what's going on? I haven't been paying attention. And I've been mailing out that graphic about the backpacks. And inevitably, it comes back saying, why was this not shown to the jury? A fair question, and one that ought to be asked by every single thinking American. Now, further complicating the issue, as we have mentioned in the past, there are usually some kind of a drill going on, security drill, where these false flag terror attacks happen. And that's so that assets are in position, ready to go, and those who are carrying out the false flag attack have cover to move in and do what they're doing. Oh, I'm just part of the drill. See, I'm supposed to be carrying a backpack with a bomb in it. I'm part of the drill. We know there was a fire department drill on the streets surrounding the Oklahoma City bombing before the bomb went off. Connie Chung actually reported that on air and immediately lost her job. There was a FEMA drill in New York the night before 9/11. There was another security exercise taking place in London during that subway bombing. And the subject of the drill was subway bombing. It's always there. So, here we have a bunch of Department of Homeland Security documents acquired by the Boston Globe that show the Department of Homeland Security was setting up a training drill at the Boston Marathon involving backpack explosives months before it actually happened. They created a fictitious terrorist group called Free America Citizens that were going to plant backpacks full of explosives for the police and firefighters and security people to find. And just like we saw with Oklahoma City, just like we saw with 9/11, like we saw with the 7/7 subway bombing in London, they're simulating the event that actually went live and happened. And a reminder, the uncle of the Tsarnaev brothers is married to the daughter of a top CIA official. And it's known that both these brothers were somehow involved with FBI and CIA months before this happened. The older brother, Tamerlan, went to Chechnya, sponsored by a group that is a CIA front. These two guys were agents of some kind, assets. And for those of you listening to this program who are assets for some intelligence agency, you need to keep in mind, if they need a dead body that looks like you, you're going to be it. They did it to known CIA asset Lee Harvey Oswald, set him up as the patsy for the assassination of John Kennedy. They did it to Tim McVeigh, who is suspected of having been an undercover FBI informant infiltrating the various patriot groups and militias across America. And they did it to the Tsarnaevs, and they will do it to you without hesitation. Just something to keep in mind tonight when you're at home abusing yourself to old James Bond movies and saying, I'm a spy, I'm a spy, I'm a spy. Anyway. Now, Ron Paul, who I am very sorry is not going to throw his hat into the ring in 2016, has been a critic of the TSA all along. And apparently, the TSA got their revenge. He was flying home to Houston, and the TSA pulled him out of line for an enhanced check. So Ron got himself patted down and groped by TSA. And it was caught on film. It's over at Ben Swan's site. Now, come on, TSA. You know who this guy is. Member of Congress, presidential candidate. You really think he's a security threat? No, this is just TSA with payback. Acting like school children. We're going to get you now. You don't like what we're doing. We're going to pat you down here. Get all of our germs all over you. Now, as you know, recently the White House has been trying to clean up the reputation of the Secret Service Protective Detail. There's been a change of management over there, and already they're back in trouble. Xavier Morales, a senior Secret Service supervisor, has been put on leave following an accusation that he basically assaulted and groped and inappropriately made sexual advances to a female Secret Service employee after a party last week. Anyway, let's see. Britain is delaying release of their documentation about the CIA's torture site on Diego Garcia. It would embarrass our friends. We don't want these things to come. It gives the United States a black eye. Actually, the U.S. government gave itself the black eye. We're just recognizing the reality of it. Over in Pakistan, their court system has confirmed the former head of the CIA in Pakistan will be tried for murder and waging war against the country and acts of terrorism regarding the drone strikes into that country. Now, what the U.S. will do about it, I don't know. They may just invade, or they may just simply offer Pakistan a huge amount of money to release him, or go in and just snatch him. But the reality is, when these drone strikes were going into Pakistan, the United States and Pakistan were not at war. And that makes these drone strikes war crimes, and Pakistan's courts agreed. Now, getting on back to the spying on us, ordinary people. amazingly enough, first of all, you need to understand, 10 years before 9/11, they were tracking international calls. They were already spying on us. They've been spying on us since the 1980s in a program called Echelon, and it didn't stop 9/11, did it? If you accept the official story that this was a terror attack carried out by a bunch of people from Afghanistan and the rest of the Mideast, all the spying didn't prevent it. Of course, for those of us who know it was an inside job, another false flag, the spying wouldn't have done anything about it. But amazingly enough, when Edward Snowden went public, there was another parallel spying operation being run by the Department of Justice through the Drug Enforcement Administration, trying to catch smugglers who are too smart to use open communications that they already know are backdoored. And they actually shut that program down because the Department of Justice determined it was legally indefensible to the American people because it is a violation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. But NSA's attitude is, screw the Constitution. We are the new government here. Now, there's another article that we linked to earlier today over at Washington's blog about how Israel has been spying on American citizens for decades. They've actually been taken to court. They were spying on citizens in San Francisco. Big lawsuit. They settled out of court. Part of the condition of the settlement is you never talk about this again. We know about the AIPAC spy scandal. We know about the scandal involving the Office of Special Projects at the Pentagon. We certainly know about Jonathan Pollard. But did you know that the NSA sends to Israel all of the raw data collected by its spy system, including the data on U.S. government officials? Who are these guys working for? The American taxpayer has been forced to fund this giant spy machine for the benefit of a foreign government? More when we come back. Hello, hi America. Welcome back to the show here. Now over at Ex Republic TV, they've got a story where they're basically saying Congress will do almost anything to avoid debating the issue of mass surveillance. And then at the last minute we'll scream about how we're all going to be killed by terrorists unless the program is extended. Now Congress can't debate the issue of mass surveillance because it is unconstitutional. Its mere existence delegitimizes the federal government. And so they don't want to talk about it. They don't even want you thinking about it. But every time they want to renew it, they'll come out and say, oh, the terrorists are coming to get you. And yet, we know that NSA's claims to the contrary, they haven't actually thwarted any terror attacks, including 9/11 itself, if you believe the official story on 9/11. And the reason for that is simple. And we proved that with our NSA encryption challenges last year. We put out 6 of these. And not one of them was solved. And we did that, first of all, to encourage people to develop their own systems of encryption. And second of all, to point out, real criminals and real terrorists, not these phonies running around with towels they stole from Holiday Inn on their head, are going to have the means to develop secure lines of communication that the NSA will not be able to get into. This NSA spy system is only spying on law-abiding citizens. And it is unconstitutional. They're sharing all of the raw data with Israel without any filtering whatsoever. Israel is getting all the secrets of our politicians. Maybe that's the special relationship. They got all the dirt. They know where the bodies are buried and how they got to be bodies in the first place. Israel is controlling our government through blackmail. And there is a good reason why all of the scandals of all the politicians ought to be made public. So that when Israel comes into a politician and says, well, you will vote to start a war with Iran, or we'll reveal how you were wallpapering your girlfriend with unenvironmentally friendly wallpaper. And if the politician turns around and says, look, everybody already knows that, big deal, get out of here, then Israel's grip on the throat of our nation goes away. And that is a good reason to rake the muck as hard as we can right now. Whatever secrets and scandals these politicians have need to be made public in order to diffuse Israel's threat against them. All righty, we're going to grab some phone calls here. We've got Damien in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha and mahalo, Michael. Good to talk to you. Very funny because you just I basically took the words right out of my mouth. I was just going to say about the special relationship. I have a feeling that this is a huge part of it, that it is basically that Israel has all this information and they know what's going on. They also know the things that the U.S. has been complicit with them in, or, I don't know, complicit or helped, arranged, looked the other way
9/11 being a perfect example. And
that's exactly what I was going to say.
Because
9/11.
If you look at Israel's arrogance before and after 9/11, there's a very obvious leap upward, where they just got much more demanding, and the U.S. stopped even pretending to be an objective, impartial arbiter between Israel and the rest of the Middle East. And I would like to know what bozo inside the U.S. government actually thought they could involve Israel in this 9/11 false flag and not have Israel turn around and blackmail the entire U.S. government with it ever since. Because Israel's over there saying, look, you don't do what we tell you, we'll tell the whole world who did 9/11. Going to be worse for you than it is for us. They expect that sort of thing from Israel. It's not going to harm us one tiny bit. But when the American people see the evidence that their own government staged 9/11, boy, are you going to be in trouble. So go on and start a war with Iran, like a good little boy.
Exactly. You've taken the words right out of my mouth. This is exactly my feeling. I was listening to the show yesterday and you were talking about, I guess you got my email about the AIPAC, that documentary. Had you seen that one? The top, can't remember the name of the site, but I had emailed you that documentary, the AIPAC one. I'm not sure if you had already seen that.
I think I linked to it as well. Yes, I did. Okay? Very cool.
Yeah, no, you took the words right out of my mouth. This is exactly what I was going to say. We already know that they have, they've even put it out in the press that, Netanyahu with, things that he did just, directly with Clinton and all these things and everything, where they basically flat out, openly talk about how they basically blackmailed the White House, blackmailed this agency, that agency, and yeah, I think that this is a big part of the special. I think this is the special relationship, that it's basically the United States blunders from, basically thinking that Israel is really an ally, and they're not. They're out for themselves, and
absolutely, and not just the United States. Look at, they've got their talons into Canada. Stephen Harper's out there ready to fight, send Canadian kids to kill any of Israel's enemies. Over in France, they're out there. They're starting to prosecute anybody who doubts the official story of the Holocaust. I mean, the world is plunging into darkness, and Israel's dragging us down that way. Okay?
Yeah. Mike, keep it up.
As long as I can. Thank you very much. We're going to switch over here to Doug in Virginia. Aloha, Doug. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, I wanted to talk about the TSA.
Yes.
And a trick question for you. What's the difference between a TSA agent and a mall cop?
And a what?
And a mall security guard.
I don't know. What is the difference?
The mall security guard is licensed and bonded.
You're absolutely right. These TSA people aren't licensed. They're not bonded. They're not chartered as law enforcement. Now they're going to start arming them.
Yeah, that makes me nervous. With the way the police are with handling the firearms, the TSA has even less training, and they're. What
are they going to do? Pull the trigger with lines of travelers in front of them? I mean, that'll be a disaster the first time it happens.
Yeah, unless, of course, they give these guys guns and then don't give them any bullets.
Well, it could very well be that the guns are just there for visual impact. But
yeah, I think they won't give them any guns because the TSA has so far successfully argued in court that that when they engage in misconduct, they can't be sued under the civil law that we have in this country, because they're not law enforcement officers. That's their argument, and the courts have fought it in case after case after case.
Yeah, I know. We had a huge scandal here in Hawaii some years back where the TSA were just helping themselves to goodies out of travelers' luggage, and all the airport could do was reassign them to some other duty where they didn't have access to that stuff anymore. But why they can't simply be prosecuted under the current laws for thievery and and the rest. I don't understand why they're basically treated as if they're above the law. So are the police, for that matter, with the rare exception of, like the gentleman who got charged with murder today because it was too obvious on the video what happened. But overall, yeah, we seem to have entered an age of governmental, immunity to anything that the people might do to fight back. Doug, got to let you go. Got to do a commercial break here. We'll be back in 4 minutes. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, story coming out of Natural News. Pentagon steps up special ops monitoring of social media sites. They're hiring more people. They're getting more computers. They're going to monitor everything on social media because they need to know what's going on out there in social media to guard the national security. All right. Attention, U.S. government. I hate to be the one to break this to you, but people lie on social media, especially if they're trying to get a hot date for the weekend. People exaggerate what they're doing, what they have done. They take pictures of other people's expensive cars and claim them as their own. They post years-old selfies and claim they're current. Social media is not and never was a reliable source of hard intelligence about anyone. You have spent billions of dollars and violated the Fourth Amendment to build a search engine into the population's self-indulgent fantasies. What loony actually thought this was going to be of any use whatsoever? And obviously at this point it hasn't. Of course, there's another aspect. During the Nazi Germany time, the government intentionally tried to create the illusion they saw and heard everything. They even knew what you were thinking. The Gestapo had informants everywhere. They were looking through every keyhole. They were reading every piece of mail. So you better be careful what you're saying. And of course, a moment's thought reveals the Nazi machine didn't have anywhere near that kind of manpower or resources to do that. But all of this stuff about we're spying on this, we're doing social media, appears to me to be a gigantic bluff to try and scare the American people into staying silent about what's going on. And if that was the agenda, they blew that one as well. And they've caused all kinds of damage doing it. Story out of ZDNet.com. Hewlett-Packard, after investing billions of dollars in its cloud service offerings, is now pulling out. It's not working for them. They're having to get out. They've huge amounts of money. They're not getting any business. Neither is anybody else out there in the cloud. Because in this era of massive spying on our business secrets and John Oliver's dick, nobody trusts the cloud for data storage, nor should they. This is another way in which the misguided policies of Washington, D.C.'s paranoia has slammed an already crippled economy. Alrighty. Now then, speaking of computers and tracking, the hacktivist group Anonymous has started tracking down all of these websites that are supposed to be supporting ISIS. All the jihadi websites that Rita Katz and Site Intelligence are always saying, oh, we're finding the stuff on all these jihadist websites and we're searching them. And it turns out the vast majority of them are hosted on servers in the United States and Great Britain. Imagine my shock. They're phonies. They're just more of the propaganda. We're going to set up a website that we claim belongs to all those gosh darn Arab Muslims. We'll put horribly offensive stuff on there. And people will get third-hand reports about what's on these Islamist websites. And it turns out they're operating out of the U.S. and UK. Alrighty. Let's see. I got to skip on down because we're running out of time here. Speaking of 9/11, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth founder Richard Gage has kicked off a month-long tour of Europe. He's going to give a lecture at Reykjavik, Iceland, on April the 11th. And you can go to AE 9/11, their website, and if you're in Europe, see if you can find a chance to listen to this guy about 9/11. Now, Richard Gage does not ascribe blame. He doesn't say who did it. He merely points out all of the overwhelming evidence that the airplanes that crashed into the two towers were not the cause of their ultimate collapse. And certainly building number 7, which was not hit by an airplane, collapsing into its own footprint. 26 minutes after BBC reported it had collapsed, I might add. It's worth listening to. I had the very great pleasure of meeting him and sharing a stage with him on the 10th anniversary of 9/11 in New York. And he's a gentleman. He's very intelligent. He speaks well. Make a point of getting to one of his presentations. All right, we're going to grab one more phone call for today. DJ in Atlanta, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Thanks for taking the call. Yeah, I don't know if you already covered this topic earlier, but I just wanted to, talk about Israel and Iran, their situation where they're trying to block this deal. And I don't know if you've mentioned it on your show before, but doesn't it seem like Iran and the U.S. want to divvy up Iran for the oil? Isn't it that?
No, they're not divvying it up. They each have different agendas leading to war. Now, we already know from Netanyahu's uncharacteristically honest comment earlier in the week, his goal is to keep Iran economically weak, so it's not a rival to Israel's business interests. He's not concerned he's not concerned Iran's going to attack. Iran has not attacked another country in a war of aggression in over 200 years. But Israel wants to get rid of regional rivals. That was the reason Israel was providing all the false evidence for the U.S. to go into Iraq. Much of that supposed evidence of Iraq's nuclear weapons came from Israel. It was sent to AIPAC. AIPAC gave it to their spy inside the Pentagon's Office of Special Projects. And the spy inside the Pentagon's Office of Special Projects put it into the daily briefings going to the White House. And the goal was to smash a regional rival, and that's what Israel wants to do with Iran, as long as American kids get to do the shooting and stopping of the bullets.
Exactly.
Now, the U.S. agenda is to have control over what currency Iran's oil is sold for. The bankers' agenda in Iran is to force Iran to accept private central banking. So all these different groups, they all have different reasons for the war, but they all overlap saying, hey, war is good for me, therefore I will help you start the war for your agenda. Okay? Okay, I think we lost the connection. All right, thank you very much. All right, now then, we're going to shut down the phone lines for the rest of the day. I got a bunch of stuff to get through here. A little bit of good news. Over in Iowa, Hillary's poll numbers are starting to decline. And all of a sudden, the Democrats are in a panic because they had basically bet the farm that Hillary was going to be their candidate in 2016, and she was going to be unbeatable. And the real world in public awareness is catching up with Hillary. Her handling of the email servers is fresh in everybody's mind, and everybody's thinking about that, and they're thinking back to all those other things about Hillary's career. The murder made to look like a suicide of White House Deputy Counsel and former Hillary lover, Vincent Foster. The travel office firings, the cattle futures trades, all of the involvement of the Clintons in the Iran-Contra cocaine and gun running down to Central America. They were neck deep in that. Whitewater, Castle Grant, Flowerwood, the Arkansas Finance Development Authority as the paymaster for all the covert operations. It's all catching up to her. And let's not forget that wonderful photo of First Lady Hillary Clinton standing in front of the White House Christmas tree with a known cocaine smuggler and Clinton donor. So her numbers are beginning to sink. The GOP is smelling blood in the water, and the Democrats are in panic mode. All right, we got to take a break. We'll be back with the last segment of our program, and as we usually do, human-caused global warming. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, final segment of the program. And before we get into the human-caused global warming, remember earlier in the show I said Pakistan's parliament had voted not to support the attacks into Yemen. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at this story in the Examiner where intelligence experts are now announcing that ISIS is gaining traction in Pakistan, and because they have nuclear weapons, we're going to have to intervene. going to just whoop on those people. All right, human-caused global warming. And I'm going to make this a regular feature of the show from now on because already the carbon Nazis are launching a major PR campaign in the corporate media and across the internet to convince us all that 2015 is going to be the hottest year on record. And that if you had snow and ice where you are, well, you're just the oddball. That's one little tiny frozen spot in a broiling world, which tells us that nobody who's writing the propaganda for Al Gore and his group understands the second law of thermodynamics. So, story out of Stephen Goddard. The oldest and thickest Arctic sea ice has more than doubled since 2012. You've been hearing in the news about, oh, the Arctic's almost ice-free. Oh, no, it isn't. No, it isn't. The ice is growing, has been for several years now. Another story out of Stephen Goddard. The extent of the Arctic sea ice has returned to the levels it had in 2005 and 2006. Let's see. Coldest start to the year on record in Washington, D.C. But they're going to push this human-caused global warming and say it's all your fault because they are desperate for a carbon tax. Because they did not get the flood of new tax revenues out of Obamacare they thought they were going to get. So now it's the carbon tax, and then it'll be the nitrogen tax, and then it'll be the water tax and the air tax. Another article about Arctic expands to Michigan. Now, this is tongue-in-cheek. It isn't really, but Lake Superior has increased water temperatures and an earlier onset of summer stratification by about 2 weeks in just the past 30 years. Within another 30 years, Lake Superior may be mostly ice-free in a typical winter. Now, this is the National Wildlife Federation that made this prediction. Okay? National Wildlife Federation, which is up to their neck in this whole global warming nonsense, a few years back predicted Lake Superior may be mostly ice-free in a typical winter. Now, to give you an idea of just how politicized the National Wildlife Federation is, you need to remember back in 2008, the National Wildlife Federation shut down its own Pennsylvania affiliate for its failure to believe that human beings are the sole cause of global warming. You will believe as we tell you to believe. Say hey. Now, reality, of course, has, just like with that bogus prediction about snowfalls are now a thing of the past we saw in 2000, the Great Lakes ice are obliterating records, have for 2 years in a row. There is still 8-foot thick ice blocking shipping. There are 15 ships currently stranded in Lake Superior. They got caught in the ice. They're sending icebreakers to try and get to them. One of the ships has already suffered hull damage as the ice closes around it. And the carbon Nazis understand the science is against them. They don't want to talk about the science anymore. They don't want to talk about thermodynamics or convection or any of those other embarrassing little scientific goofs they've made. They're going on the warpath. Over at Gawker, Adam Weinstein is making the argument that it's time to throw anybody who doubts human-caused global warming in jail. He says they're all global warming, they're all climate change deniers. Well, nobody's denying climate changes. Climate always changes. It always has. It always will. And climate is dominated here on Earth by solar output, which is at a 100-year low, and the slowly changing shape of Earth's orbit. The global warming hoax is to say the world is warming, it's all your fault for your carbon dioxide, and you have got to be taxed on your carbon dioxide. And they have to stick with global warming because they can't say you're the cause of global cooling, because then there's no reason to tax carbon dioxide. In fact, they say put more up there if you believe the link between carbon dioxide and planetary temperatures. We're not denying anything. We're simply saying we don't see where the case has been made that climate on Earth is dominated by human activity, or that it's even getting warmer after several record-setting winters. Now, over at the University of Washington, they're trying to come up with another way of explaining how the Earth is really warming, even though there's snow and ice all over the place. And now they're calling it the blob. Okay? There's a blob of warm water in the Pacific Ocean. The thermographs show that it's just lingering there, this blob of warm water. Okay. Now, the only way you have a blob of warm water holding itself together in the currents and convection is if there's a volcano on the floor of the ocean and they're seeing the plume coming up there. And remember, one of the big failings of this idea that human activity is warming the ocean is that nobody knows how many volcanoes and thermal vents are down there. And if they don't know that, they don't know how much of the ocean temperature is being influenced by geothermal activity. Remember the El Nino current that they were always talking about? It just sort of emerged around New Zealand and it disrupted the climate all over the place. Well, they finally got down there to the floor of the ocean underneath where El Nino originates, and they found a chain of active volcanoes on the floor of the ocean. That's where the heat's coming from. It's not coming from your plastic bags. And you keep wondering, why are they still pushing this hard after so many embarrassing cold winters? And it turns out, back in 2013, Christiana Figueres, an official with the United Nations, said that the only way to fight human-caused global warming is massive depopulation of the planet. They don't want to deal with us anymore. They've gotten all of our wealth. We've built up these wonderful cities and expensive mansions for them to live in, and now they just want us to go away. And we know depopulation is a covert U.S. policy, National Security Study Memorandum 200. Anyway, let's see. Over in Baltimore, Salisbury University is recommending their students take skin tests for tuberculosis after discovering 3 confirmed cases among the student body. And there's 8,700 students are going to have the test. And to add to that, over at Olathe Northwest High School in Kansas, they have 27 more cases of tuberculosis. Now, remember when tuberculosis was declared eradicated here in the United States of America? Gee, I wonder how it got back into the United States of America. And as it turns out, tuberculosis is one of the illnesses the illegal immigrants are confirmed as bringing into the United States of America. Gee, thanks a lot, Obama. First of all, you give us sky-high costs for medical care because of Obamacare, and now you're bringing in these highly infectious people and spreading them all across the country. What are you thinking? And finally, there was a story over in American Vision. This is a flashback to 2009, and it's telling the story of how President Obama got up in his press conference to sell Obamacare, and he had all these doctors from all across the country, and they were asked to show up wearing white laboratory coats. And some of them didn't, but no problem. The White House already had a selection of white laboratory coats for them to put on for the photo op. Remember what I said before about how the white laboratory coat has replaced a priest's robes in tricking you into doing what the rulers want you to do? They're handling science like a new religion. Just believe what we say, because I have a white laboratory coat, and do what I'm going to tell you to do, because I got huge amounts of funding from the government to tell you that you are destroying the earth and you must atone. Individual scientists are just as corruptible as individual clergy or individual politicians. You should never trust somebody because they say they're a scientist. You should trust yourself and know enough science and history to be able to spot these endless hoaxes. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get some animation work done. We will be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay informed, make good choices, be skeptical, be angry. I give you permission to be angry at what's going on. Please tell all your friends and family about Genesis Communication and WhatReallyHappened.com. We need your continued support because we're not getting the big bucks to lie to you. We're telling you the truth, and generally that goes for a very, very low paycheck. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.